Hi everyone, welcome. We're down here in my wormery, and I'm getting ready to check in on the red wiggler worms that I consider as my original red wigglers. The worms that I'm fairly sure I can trace all the way back to my very first batch of worms, and they live in these two trays right here. In my arrangement of things, that does make them amongst my oldest systems. And for a few check-ins now, the only stuff we've been given them is very small particle-sized foods. We've been sprinkling in some coffee, a little bit of worm chow, and that's about it. And that's been their feedings for the past few check-ins, and I thought I would do a similar feeding this time too. Today they're 292 days of age. They've already been fed 25 times, so every one of those sprinkling on of coffee and sprinkling on of worm chow does, in my book, count as a feeding. And what they're going to get today is feeding number 26. It's been 12 days since they were last fed that stuff, so I think they're due. So let's get the systems up onto the bench and see how they're coming along. So the whole idea behind feeding them small particle food size things, such as the coffee and worm chow, is, well, perhaps obvious, but it's really to try to reduce leftover particles of stuff, leftover chunks of food in this case, so that when it comes time to harvest the castings, what you're left with is not a whole bunch of leftover food chunks and stuff like that, but rather the castings, which is what you're after. One thing I'm also after is a reduction of these little snails. The snails definitely do seem to congregate on the plastic where the moisture is recirculating. So they're probably coming up to enjoy that moisture. I don't know. Dialing in the moisture on these systems was something we talked about as a possible way to try to reduce these snails, perhaps by making the area a little bit more arid on the surface. Perhaps the snails would vanish, but haven't really tried that. We could probably go that route today though, and maybe give it a try. I do see one worm out here on the surface that I think I'm going to evict, but then maybe this plastic could just be left up, first facing up like this to the air, so that any moisture on any of these little fragments of castings can evaporate and leave the whole material there sort of dried out. And I think that's what we're going to do with the surface here too. So that was the idea that I came down here with, was to retire the plastic coverings and see if possibly just letting the top surface of the material in the worm bin dry in order to see if it might end up in eliminating the little tiny snails. Perhaps they are also dependent on the moisture, and perhaps they don't have the ability to, burrow down into the material and escape the encroaching arid conditions that they, can't handle. I wanted to keep them on here and not shake them off like that, so that was an oopsie. And at the end, we're going to, level things off the way we always do, and then leave it uncovered. And it's for that reason we're not going to be leaving the food out on the surface the way we have in recent feedings. In the recent feedings, we would sprinkle the coffee out here, a little bit of worm chow on top of that, and then it would be covered with the plastic causing this really nice section of recirculation. And you can clearly see it on the camera too, how dark it is here in the middle, where the moisture's been, forced down and not left to leave, and then out here is where things have been left to dry. And this is 12 days of drying out here. I mean, I'm looking over here and I still see a snail here, a snail here. So I'm not quite sure if, they're going to be as averse to the dryness as I'm hoping, but we'll have to see, I guess. No harm in trying. And I also like the idea of the drying of the material throughout as ways to offer ourselves the option, should we want to take that route, of kind of screening this material to free it of any sort of little particle matter, leftover bits of bedding and food that still remain. And I kind of like having that option. I don't know if I'm going to go that route, You know, I've thought about possibly setting these worms up for migration where they leave the castings on their own, but sometimes I've had pretty good luck recently just trying to run the whole system's contents through a screen. A lot of times the castings fall through, leaving behind material that still needs to be worked on by the worms and the worms. I mean, yeah, some worms fall through the screen and end up in the collected castings, but a great many of them, the large majority of them I would say, stay within the material that gets caught in the screen. So I'm definitely observing moisture over here in bin number 2 as I till up the center of the system. Enough moisture that it sort of adheres to my glove, perhaps a little more than I would want it to. My guess is over here in bin number 1 we're going to see more of the same. For some reason I think bin number 1 over here, we had already started sensing last time how the material in here did seem a little bit more prone to flaking away, but still here too I'm sensing a little bit of clumpiness and stickiness. This is where we're going to take the material from the dry outer edges, especially the stuff out on the top surface, and bring that inboard so that we could try to combine it with this most moist stuff that we just tilled up from the middle section where we had plastic coverings. And from this point forward, I think we're going to be giving ourselves a pretty good opportunity to see this material dry by not having it covered. I thought about at least putting paper coverings on here, and I probably would have done that, or I probably will do that if I don't sense that there's anything on the surface that I want to try to contend with. But here we've got those snails, and it does feel to me like, you know, that might be one possible way for us to, you know, make the environment hostile enough that they can't really remain. But then again, it could just be a fool's errand, because we definitely saw worms hanging out in the dry on the outer edges. I see a couple over there too, so perhaps they can handle it better than I think. Or maybe they can go down and get to material that suits them, you know, so I don't know. I'm not sure if it's worth the effort to try, but what the heck. So yeah, we're gonna blend in the feeding so that it's not on the surface, because by being on the surface it will be in a place where the worms are not going to be inclined to go, with it being, you know, intentionally drier there. So we'll blend in the foods on this go around. Get the stuff incorporated down into the material, down low, so that they can eat it all and not leave leftovers. Although it is hard to imagine them leaving leftovers of coffee and worm chow, but I guess if it was sprinkled out onto a dry top surface that the worms don't want to hang out at, then maybe it would result in some neglected food. And I guess, you know, as long as we're sprinkling down the foods, I'm thinking one way we could possibly get rid of these little bits of carbon food source is how I'm seeing it, just by combining it with the feeding today. Sprinkling the foods right on top of this stuff, I think, is going to ensure it being consumed by the worms. So it's kind of hard to see where it's at, but it's kind of centralized, and I thought that perhaps maybe we don't even need to blend it in too much. Maybe we can just sort of cover it up with some of this material that we positioned out on the outer edges. Yeah, why don't we do it that way? And I think that'll be leaving the material close enough to the surface where it would be in a place where the worms will probably go looking for food. I got sidetracked. I was trying to make sure I cover things up. Luckily I could see, you know, see what's going on here with the worm chow being pretty bright in color, so I can gauge that I've covered things appropriately. And I think that's kind of where we're at. And I think my little homework on this setup is going to be to check back on these pieces of plastic and see what became of the little snails. My hope is that they don't go running all over the place and ending up on my bench or whatever. I'm not really sure what to expect. Perhaps I'll put those plastic coverings into a bin of their own just to keep them contained to some degree. We'll see what happens. So that's it for the check-in, everyone. So hopefully we'll be seeing these systems dry out enough to the point where all the material in the system flows equally well, granular enough. And yeah, the surface out here on the top is going to get a little neglected due to the dryness that's going to occur, but I think that's fine. So I'll be checking back on those plastics, putting these systems away, but that'll be later. So that's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.